Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to be here with all of you today, and it's a real honor for me to introduce this panel and to moderate this very timely event on soft power approaches to countering terrorism. I'm a great admirer of the work of Dr. Ann Speckhard in the International Center for the Study of Violent Extremism, so I'm really delighted to be here to add my voice to their important work. I know we at MBN, where I am president now at Middle East Broadcasting Networks, hope to highlight the work of ICSVE in the near future. As some of you know, I headed the State Department's counter-messaging work in 2012 to 2015 at the Center for Strategic Counterterrorism Communications, which began in 2011. I look back on that work, and it was, I look back on it, and it seems very, very simple, very basic, baby steps in the right direction. But what we did and what others subsequently did, like ICSVE, are part of something which needed to be done. The adversary was very, very active early on in this space, and we, I think in the West, relied all too often thinking that whatever advantages Western society, Western media, kind of liberal democratic societies had built in, that was going to be good enough, and it clearly wasn't. I also want to welcome Ambassador Dr. Mutlaq Al-Qahtani, the Special Envoy for Qatar's Foreign Minister for Counterterrorism and Mediation. In my view, one of the most thoughtful voices in the area of the use of soft power against extremist or terrorist thought is, in fact, a Qatari who is well known to some, but is actually not well known enough in the United States. When I was vice president at MEMRI, I wrote on the views of Dr. Abdul Hamid Al-Ansari, the former dean of the Sharia faculty at Qatar University, and a great and eloquent Muslim voice for reform and humanity. And in my December 2016 article on his writings and his frequent appearances in social media, I noted that he had not only analyzed deeply and profoundly the ideological wellsprings of jihadist violence, but had also outlined some very practical soft power steps to fight it. One thing he noted was the value, for example, of a humanistic education, one that is broadly ecumenical and open to the world, one that incorporates music and art, humanity, in the approach to people. I liked that approach then, and I like it specifically, not just because of the content, but because it is very specific, very tangible. One of the problems that we have faced in the West, in the United States, when we talk about soft power approaches to counterterrorism, and we see this in the U.S. government, we have seen this in the U.S. government from 2001 on, is that everything that is not kinetic, everything that is not the work of intelligence agencies and the work of our military gets defined as a soft power approach to the problem. So a basketball clinic or a rule of law thing or a NGO thing or a youth thing, all of it can be lumped together in this very broad and fuzzy category of soft power. And of course, if you could say that if everything is soft power, nothing is soft power. These individual activities can be helpful. They can be good things, but they can also be too soft, too general, too vague. You can certainly be too narrow and miss the large problem. But generally what government has done and generally what civil society and others have done is actually cast its net too broadly. I think that one of the things that we need to do when we talk about this challenge is to look at the issue from the perspective of the adversary. Because just like there are soft power approaches to counterterrorism, there are soft power approaches to terrorism. One of them, of course, is education, both formal schooling and religious training. A document, for example, that I often come across in Salafi and Salafi Jihadist website is Muhammad Abdul Wahhab's The Nullifiers of Islam, Nawaqid al-Islam. I've seen this in the past on Gulf Arab-controlled religious portals, but it's now everywhere, and it's broadly available in English in the West, very easy to find on social media. ISIS, of course, refers to it in its propaganda. The Nawaqid al-Islam, or the Nullifiers of Islam, are 10 conditions that Abdul Wahhab gives that if you follow these things, or if you believe in these things, you are no longer a Muslim. So you lose your Muslim identity by doing these things. Two of them are particularly key when you talk about soft power. One of the nullifiers is that anyone who regards a polytheist, a mushrik, as anything more than an infidel is an infidel himself. So this creates kind of concentric, expanding webs of takfir, or of infidelity. If you're nice to a Jew, if you're nice to a Christian, if you believe that maybe I don't agree with them, but you know, there's no problem between me and them, you, as a Muslim, are no longer a Muslim. So you're caught in a kind of catch-22 of jihadism, catch-22 of radicalism. Another nullifier that Abdul Wahhab uses is supporting the polytheists against the Muslims, supporting the mushrikeen against the Muslims. So, for example, a jihadist could say, and they have said, that Qatar are themselves kuffar or infidels because they support the US-American air base at Al-Udeid against the Islamic State or the Taliban. I actually saw it wasn't an ISIS video, it was a pro-ISIS video a few years ago that made the same argument about Saudi Arabia. It featured like fighter pilots with Americans, you know, and a kind of military-to-military cooperation. You see these videos and this stuff, kind of very soft kind of stuff of people meeting with each other and stuff like that. And it used those images to say, if you're friends with them, you're like them. So you are an infidel if you're doing that. So these types of arguments are soft. They're words. There's no violence involved. But they are poison. Poison as much as terrorist acts and as much as terrorist financing. In addition to education, including religious education, another soft power approach we see is media. And again, how do our adversaries use soft power to promote terrorism? This is something that we at MBN are trying to develop in a very competitive and saturated market. Programming that is humanistic, that promotes tolerance, that is full of enlightenment or liberal values, what we call in Arabic, afkar tanwiriya, enlightenment values. And I hope I'm following in Dr. Ansari's steps in this. But our adversaries have concentrated heavily on media. And it's easy to focus on what Al-Qaeda produces or what ISIS produces. That's not what I'm referring to. There's all sorts of another world of softer material, which is even more insidious. For example, in 2016 and 2017, in my research, I documented some of the remarks of an Egyptian cleric named Wajdi Ghonaim, who broadcasts from Turkey. Incredibly, he was for many years the imam of an Orange County, California mosque before being expelled from the United States. He's, of course, very much against the Egyptian government, and he talks a lot about that. But he also, in his discourse, talked, for example, about religious minorities in Egypt at a time when Coptic Christians were being singled out for death by the Islamic State. Ghonaim, Muslim Brotherhood supporter, is supposedly against the Islamic State, right? ISIS and the MB are not the same thing. They're very two different things. And yet, in his narrative about religious minorities, the language that he used, the justification that he used, the worldview that he amplified was almost identical with that of the Islamic State, even though he's not an ISIS member. In fact, ostensibly an ISIS opponent. rather than express any sort of normal humanistic feeling about people, women and children being blown up in their place of worship, for example, he gloated, he justified, he minimized, he repeated false accusations of Coptic power and of monasteries being turned into arsenals. It's exactly what ISIS has been saying in its propaganda for years. So here you have, as I said, an MB supporting supposed opponent of ISIS actually advancing that narrative. Unfortunately, we see a lot of that in the region today. Language, discourse, justification, whether from countries like Turkey or others in the region that put this material out. They themselves are not actual terrorist states. They themselves are not actually members of terrorist organizations, but they put out material, soft power, words, and media that are deadly. Finally, I would close with this thought. The jihadist movement, which we all struggle with, that the members of the panel are working against, has organic roots. It has organic political, religious, ideological roots. But it is also a fabricated movement. In other words, it is also artificial. It has an organic basis, but it was also something that was cultivated, nurtured, and funded over time. Sometimes it was funded by states, sometimes it was funded by individuals, sometimes it was funded by organizations. The soft power of today against terrorism must also be massively cultivated and nurtured and funded by states and by individuals in the media, in education, in publishing, in employment. My only criticism of the work of ICSVE is that it is kind of like the work of CSCC back in my day, too small. We need to, over time, be able to change the ideological balance in the right direction. I think this event is one of many positive steps, many more are needed, in the direction that we need to go. Thank you very much, and now I invite Dr. Speckhard to speak.
So thanks everyone for coming out. You heard that, we need funding, we're too small. Thanks, great way to start. And thank you to our funders. So we've witnessed over the past 5 years a catastrophe of epic proportions. We've watched Syria implode, we've watched groups rise up, and ISIS among them. And this group, like no other group, managed to attract 40,000 foreign fighters. I don't know if you know this, but Al-Qaeda in Iraq attracted 5,000. Never before have we seen anything like that. A terrorist group declaring a caliphate and able to pull in 40,000 fighters from 130 countries. So how did they manage to capture the hearts and minds of disillusioned and marginalized individuals all over the world? Some credit social media. Some say that they had this amazing, slick propaganda machine, which is true. But we also know that Hamas and Hezbollah developed video games for little kids. Al-Qaeda had their films. You remember when Osama bin Laden wanted to make an announcement? Suddenly, probably big clunky videotape was delivered to Al Jazeera, and it played, and then all the networks around the world played it. But suddenly, we had Islamic State, in quotes, able to just blanket the internet with their films. But what was different? Why were they able to capture 40,000 foreign fighters and create this movement and have, for some time, an actual state? Something that ran a government, taxed people, held territory, and had military and terrorist operations. How did they do that? And some is the films, but really what happened was they got lucky. They came up at a time when they threw all their things out on social media. They didn't have to rely on any network or any journalist to deliver their videotape to. They threw it all out, and then they watched. And you all know you have Facebook pages, you have Twitter pages, maybe you watch YouTube from time to time. You hit like, you hit share, you retweet. Well, when you do that, the person whose propaganda it is, or message it is, or maybe it's your sister or your aunt, right? They know you did it, and they can find you. So Mike, when you shared my video, I can say, do you want to come to Syria? Are you interested? Would you like to meet a hot babe? I can set you up. Or maybe Ardian retweeted. Ardian, how's things in Kosovo? Would you like to come? I can find you, and I can start to play with you, and I can look into what are your needs when I start talking to you. What did you like about my video? And we know this actually happens. We have a journalist in France who created a fake Facebook profile, and she started putting things on her fake Facebook profile, and one of the things she put was a jihadi fighter's film from France. The same day, he contacted her and he said, did you like my film? Didn't you think I was a manly man in it? And he got right to the point. Would you like to come to Syria? And started playing with her. She was a journalist pretending to be a younger woman, so she played back, and didn't work out well for her. In the end, she got a fatwa for him to kill her. But she played back for a long time and watched how he did a whole seduction process. We have a girl in Washington State that happened to, and it happened all around the world. And these people were really good on drawing people in that were vulnerable, people that were marginalized. We know that Muslims all over the world are struggling. If they're living in Europe, they may be marginalized and discriminated against as new immigrants and as Muslims. They may find that they can get an education, but they can't get a job, or they can't get a job that they were educated for. So they're angry. And here comes this group telling them, why are you living in a kafir country? I've got a house for you. I've got a wife for you. I've got a job for you. You're not respected here. I've got respect for you. You can get in on the bottom layer of what we're building, and it's going to be amazing. And they started selling a dream, a utopian dream, a caliphate. And who doesn't like a dream? Who doesn't want to believe in justice, dignity, prosperity? We all want that, right? So that's what they were really good at. And we know that we had to destroy that machine, right? So our military went after ISIS, and thank God they no longer control much of their territory. We bombed them, and I should say our coalition, all our partners included. We bombed them. We found out where they were preparing their propaganda. We destroyed it. But how do you destroy a brand? How do you destroy an idea? How do you take that apart? That's the tough part, isn't it? And we know that that dream and that brand lives on. We've been interviewing ISIS cadres for some time, and what I find is when they've walked away or been captured and taken away from ISIS, even if they get really disillusioned with ISIS itself, they're very rarely disillusioned with the dream. They still want to believe that. They still want to hope that maybe that caliphate can be built. So how do you take that down? And we decided at ICSVE, I've been interviewing terrorists for 20 years. I've interviewed almost 600 of them. And in the case of the ones that are already dead, their family members or their hostages. And I've been looking at what puts someone into the terrorist trajectory, and also, since I'm a psychologist, what could you do to have prevented them from entering the terrorist trajectory? Or if you have them on it, how could you turn them back? And so we sat and thought, and we were following in the footsteps of Ambassador Fernandez. How could we take an insider's voice and turn it back on them? So at ICSVE, we truly believe that the best person to counter message against ISIS is someone who's been inside ISIS, because they know the group for what it really is, that it's un-Islamic, that it's barbaric, that it's corrupt, that things like rapes happen, stealing money, terrible things that, according to this utopian ideal, were never to happen. So what we started to do, we went out, and we didn't know if we could do it, to find ISIS guys and women and see if we could get them on film. And I have to say, when we sat down 2 years ago with our first sponsor of this project, when we talked about getting ISIS on film, I said, I don't know, I might be the one that ends up on film. I might be able to get former Al-Qaeda, might be able to get former Al-Shabaab, ISIS, I don't know. But amazingly, we did it. And I wish Dr. Yalla was here, that I could thank him in person, but we can thank him on the live stream. He was our first partner to help us to get to the defectors in Turkey, Syrian defectors that had run away from ISIS and were willing to talk. So they were the first ones we got on film. But at this point, with Dr. Sheikhovsi and Haris Fazlou, who I don't think managed to come today, but with different people, we managed to get in the prisons in Kosovo. We managed to talk to returnees that had gone to ISIS and come back to Europe, to Belgium, 2 of them from Belgium, another one from another Scandinavian country that I don't like to name. And we also got into the prisons in Baghdad. And at this point, we've managed to talk to 78 ISIS men and women. So people that ran away or left, maybe not defecting, or were captured by the other side and put in prison and had some time to think about their time in ISIS. And all of our interviews, they might be 2-3 hour interview. They're about who were you before you joined ISIS? What was your childhood like? What was your favorite subject in school? Did you like to play football? You know, how were you raised? Was your family happy? Was it prosperous? What were your struggles? How did you hear about ISIS? What attracted you to ISIS? And amazingly, you know, we'll be in Iraq and we'll find out social media. You'd think, you know, if you're in a conflict zone, the recruiters would be right there. But we hear, no, I heard about it on Twitter. I heard about it on Facebook. And then I started looking into it more, and then I found a relative that was in, and I contacted him. Or we're in Belgium, and you would hope that it was on social media. And instead, you hear the recruiter down the street was asking me to come, and then talked me into traveling all the way to Syria. But either way, we go through this process of asking them all the questions. What did you like about ISIS? Did they sell you this dream? What parts of the dream did you buy into? How were you trained? And we hear horrific stories like, I went to Sharia training, and at the end of Sharia training, they brought me a prisoner and asked me to behead him. I didn't have a choice. Or they tell us about going to weapons training. And then they tell us about what they became. I was a guard. I was a member of the Hizbah. I was the one that had to torture women that didn't dress correctly. I was an Islamic preacher, a Sharia preacher, whatever they were. They tell us about their role. And then we ask them, what were the things that you saw that didn't agree with this dream? What were the things that made you upset? What made you quit? How did you figure out how to quit? How did you defect? How did you reach a smuggler? How did you pay for that smuggler? How did you get out? Or if they're caught, how is that? How are you dealing with that it didn't work out so well for you? And in Iraq, a lot of the people that have been arrested, and we've interviewed over 30 now in the prisons, have death sentences. So a question we ask them is, how's it going to be for you when you meet Allah? You have a death sentence. What do you expect? And actually, that question really gets them talking because they're scared and they're remorseful. So we ask them all these things. They're talking on film. And then later, we sit with a video editor and we chop it up. And we look for what is the strongest message. Oh, and I should say at the end, if they didn't like ISIS, we tell them there's other people just like you. They're still being activated. Look, we had the attacks in New York. We just had this attack in Germany. We don't know if it's ISIS or not, but we have attacks, you know, week by week around the world that ISIS has orchestrated and inspired. And sometimes they'll tell us in Iraq, well, ISIS is dead, it's defeated. And I say, no, no, the idea is still there because we're still seeing attacks. And what is your advice to someone that's reading ISIS propaganda, because it's still out there? And I should say one of the things that we do to destroy that propaganda is we have takedown policies. But we also know that even with the takedown policies, that ISIS manages to use Facebook live streaming. They manage to make quick, fleeting profiles and then just migrate their followers from profile to profile. Or if they capture you on one of these fleeting profiles, they say, let's go over to Telegram, where it's encrypted. But anyway, if they're willing to denounce the group, we ask them, would you give advice? Would you give advice for kids from your own country? And would you give advice to foreigners who still are thinking of acting in your behalf and think that it helps you? What's your advice to them? So then with a video editor, we chop this all down, and we get to 4 minutes of someone talking. But that's not very interesting. I mean, you know, you're all listening to me, but it'd be better if I had some B-roll behind me, some film going, right? And so we had to think, how do we make a person's story come alive? And we decided ISIS propaganda itself. Why not take what they're putting out there and flip it back on them, turn it upside down, and put another set of emotions, another message to it, you know, a message of disgust, disillusionment, despair. It didn't work out. So we take little pieces of ISIS propaganda and splice it in with the speaker. And then we've got a completed 3 to 4 minute video, and I'm going to show you a few of those. But anyway, when we created these videos, at first, now we have 18 created so far, and with our new funding, we're hoping to pump out 2 a week, which will be a challenge, but I hope we're able to do it. And at first, we put them out on YouTube, and I should say, we subtitle them in all the languages that ISIS recruits in. Because if we put them just in English, what about the Russian guys? You know, Russia had a huge amount of people go. What about in Arabic? If the speaker's speaking Arabic, we still know the subtitles are really important. We subtitle in French, in German, in Dutch, in Uzbek, and Malay. And we put them all up on YouTube, and we watched to see what would happen. Would they get played? And now we're finding that they're getting played, you know, 20, 40,000 plays on each of them in different languages, which is really cool. And, but we found out that wasn't enough. So then we decided to direct them on Facebook. So the first thing we did was we created fake Facebook profiles because we were scared. And one of the guys that was working on this was in London, so it's a little bit more dicey. He might get a visitor, right? And anyway, we created these fake Facebook profiles, and we used the hashtags that ISIS uses, and we chased them. And we found out that very quickly we could assemble, even with all the takedown policies of Facebook, we could assemble a sample of 50 Facebook English speakers that were endorsing ISIS, sharing ISIS materials, or having a lot of ISIS friends or ISIS endorsers on their profile as their friends. So we rated those people as highly radicalized. We don't know if they're truly people. They might be a bot. They might be all the same person with 50 different fake Facebook profiles. But we decided that if that's a person, the ethical thing to do is an intervention, because they themselves may go down a terrible poisonous path to their own destruction, and they may hurt a lot of people. I mean, they could come into a room like this and explode themselves, right? So we tagged them with our counter-narrative videos. And we found, oh, and I should say, our counter-narrative videos, since they're illustrated with ISIS B-roll, the thumbnail is always an ISIS picture. So it looks like an ISIS video. And then we got advice from Google, don't name it best ever counter-narrative. Name it something that an ISIS person would want to read. So we name it The Glorious Cubs of the Caliphate, A Sex Slave, A Gift for You from Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. So these ISIS supporters on Facebook saw our videos, they saw the thumbnail, they saw the title, they didn't bother to read it, and they redistributed it. And that's when I looked to my staff and I said, we're so dead. And, but anyway, slowly, they started to watch the videos, and then we got a lot of curses into us. But since they shared it, and since they discussed it among themselves, it ended up going out to an even wider circle, to the circles that they influence, which we thought was pretty cool. We repeated the same study in Albanian with 123 cases, and they're all written up, they're on our website, so these are the pictures of those if you want to go look for the academic studies. And then Facebook, we started working with them with Facebook ads because they said, we really don't like you to make fake Facebook profiles. So we cut that out. And now we started with Facebook ads. So we put them out. We blanketed Iraq with one of our videos in the month of December. And we've just written it up. And it's, that one's not on our website, but I'm happy to give it to anybody that wants to read it. And we find that people engage with these videos. It's really cool. And then we also tell NGOs, schools, police, teachers all over the world. We go and train them, and we say, you can use these. Here's tools for you, because everything we produce is free. And so we have the police telling us, you know, from time to time when there's a terrorist attack, we're called in and we have to speak. We've had police in Kyrgyzstan put our videos on their website and say, we're going to take these when we go out and speak. Same thing with police in Belgium. Teachers in Belgium told us we're too scared to bring these videos into our classroom because our students are too radicalized and we don't know how to do it. So now we started making study guides to go with the videos. And it goes on and on. So I think instead of, oh, and I should say, they're being used on 4 different continents right now, which is pretty exciting. So we're small, but we have an impact. And our favorite story is about a guy in London that was working with a 13-year-old. This little 13-year-old was hell-bent on going to Raqqa. And he kept telling his counselor, I'm going to go to Raqqa, I'm going to go to Raqqa. And on the 3rd time, the counselor thought, geez, I don't want to call the police, but this kid's really going to go to Raqqa. And what should I do? And he remembered about one of our counter-narrative videos. So he turned it on, and it's a story of a kid about his same age that had been in ISIS. And he said, just watch this, 5 minutes. So they watched it together. And the kid's a little thug, so he turned to him and he goes, is that for real? And he said, yeah, that's for real. That's a real guy that was in ISIS. And what do you think? And the kid said, I'm not going. I'm not going to go. Changed his mind. And Ardian and I had the same experience. We were in Suleymaniye interviewing an ISIS emir, and he was really terrifying. And I have to say, usually I don't get scared in our interviews. I've gotten used to it. But this guy, something about it, I don't know if it was jet lag, what it was, but we got talking about the sex slaves, and he said, well, if I controlled this room, all the women in it, they're mine. I can do as I wish with. And I just got terrified. And I was taking notes on my laptop, and I said, wait a minute. I've got 2 guys. I've got their videos on my laptop. They're really short videos. They totally disagree with you. Would you be willing to watch them? So here this guy is in shackles, and the Peshmerga guard takes my laptop, holds it over his hands, and I'm thinking, my laptop's going to go flying across the room. And I really like my laptop. And holds it for him, and we turn on one of the videos. It was completely the opposite of what I expected. He's totally engaged with the video, watched every picture, commented on pictures, said, this kid's Iraqi. No, he's Syrian. No, he's Iraqi. I hear his dialect. I mean, just totally immersed in the video. And this is a horrible man, credited with killing 500 people, sending 13 suicide bombers. And he watched it intently. And at the end, he hung his head in shame. And then we showed him another video. We weren't content to stop at one. The next one was about sex slaves. And after that one, he said, we were wrong. We shouldn't have done that. And this is a guy bragging about sex slaves 5 minutes ago. And we were wrong. We had internal debates about this. We gave a bad name to Islam. I was so sorry we weren't filming in that interview. We didn't have permission to film in that interview. But still, if we can reach someone like that, we know it's working. And so anyway, instead of going on and on, I'm going to show you a couple videos, and you can decide for yourself. They all have a different flavor, because it depends what the person says, where they're from, and what video editor worked on it. But here's our first one.
وبأنه ننتمي للتنظيم لأن احنا سنة تصير سنة وإيد واحدة وناخذ الدولة الحكومة شو بأنه تصير حكومة سنية وبأنه كل من ياخذ حقه أنت تاخذ حقك من الأذاك بأنه يصير دولة سنية وثأر من السجنوني والأذوني كنت معتقل بالسجن 2013 ديالة بلادروس فهو كنت على مشكلة واعتقلوني عائلية يعني عشائرية شلون بين عشيرة وعشيرة فصار بيها دم واعتقلوني يعني فعن طريق هذا الشغل اكو ولد اسمه زياد انتميت وياه من طلعت قال لي اعطينا رقمك نعم هو كان تم التنظيم نعم اعطيته رقم ما طلع رقمي للتنظيم اللي برا يخابروني والتحق وياهم يصير وياهم ثأر انا بانه نفسي بانه اعتقلوني وانا كنت بريء وما عندي شيء بهاي السالفه بالسجن وتاذيت وتاذوا عائلتي بانه دفعوا محامي واصدقائي هم اللي كانوا وياي بهاي الشغله كلهم تنازلوا عنهم وطلعوهم بس انا ما تنازلوا بانه شيء يعني شيء سني او هم ذاك الشيء كلهم تنازلوا عليهم وطلعوا بس انا ما تنازلوا عني بانه اشتغلوا وياهم بعد 5 عبوات ناسف انا صرت واحده على سيد احمد بلد روس واحده على اركان سعود الجوزه كانوا مصدر للقوات الامنيه وقالوا تحط العبوه بالباب مالتهم شخص إلى عمر قالوا لهم بالعصا لا بالسيارة هاي خلته. شخص يدعى أبو سلام منتسب بالقوات الأمنية بالمنطقة داخل المنطقة بالباب مالتهم. 5 منطقة حي العصري بالدروس ديالة قالوا هذا بيت مال ضابط بالباب مالتهم. بالعلاقة هي بس تحطها وتنسحب وتدق على هذا الرقم وتشوف التفكير كل يوم بينهم صار عليهم شيء. فثاني يوم الصبح دريت بينهم علمت بينهم ما مخطوب بينهم وبالخوف بينه إذا حد مات شلون راح اتحاسب ايش راح يصير عليه. يعني انا ايش راح يصير مصيري بانه انا قتلت هذا البشر. لا خايف من الله ما خايف من الله عز وجل. من 5 طقيت قتل بها الطفل ال5 قبل يجي ببالي بس يعني ببالي بانه الطفل هسه وين راح هذا شنو حاله انا ايش راح يصير حالي. قالوا لي الطفل انقتل ولد بس بشيء انقهر عليه واترجى بانه يسامحني. لحد الان ما وصل بانه متوقع بانه يسامحني عز وجل. هو الطفل هذا بريء يعني من هاي الشغله وانا يعني احس بنفسي بانه انا طبيت السجن شيء قتل هذا الطفل. اتعب بالنوم مالتي واتعذب فيها لان تعبان يلا انا اختنق مرات اقعد عرقان. وقبل وقع بنفسي بانه اعتقلت شيء لانه انظلم هذا الطفل. هم بالبيت اعتقلوني انتقل بانه اعتقل. اي بس اسمع صوت ما شفته يعني تعيط وش عنده وهو ما مسوي شيء شنو مسوي هو افتقدهم كل شيء. انا صار سنتين يعني ما مواجه ولا شايفهم. ما عندي لا رقم موبايل بانه خابرهم او اتصل عليهم يعني او يجوني على المدن يواجهوني. ما حصل كل شيء. انتميت للتنظيم. علمت بانه تصير دوله سنيه وانا اثار نفسي انتميت للتنظيم وصار العكس علي بانه اعتقلوني هاي طبيت للسجن. بهذليت وراحت حياتي اخرى بانه قتلت طفل والذهاب الى الجحيم. بس ادعو الله عز وجل ان يغفر لي الذنب اللي انا سويته. يعني ما راح يعني ما سوى كل شيء بل يؤدي الى الاسوء.
So that's one. And I'll play one more for you. And I should say at the end, we just created a new website. Well, we're in the process of creating the new website. It's going to be called The Real Jihad, and it will take people that are watching it, because right now it takes them to our website, and that's really academic. And it will take them to a website to discuss exactly the things you were talking about. So here, go aheid. I think it's turned just a little bit already.
طبعا جوزها استشهد ايام الجيش الحر. هذا الشيء 4 أولاد. اللي يجي تعرفي يتحسن يعطيها وكذا. هي ملتزمة المرأة. جاء عرض يعني عرض واحد قال انه تتزوجيني كذا. قالت له لا انه عايش اولادي وما اقدر وكذا. قال هاني اعيشهم. قالت له شوف يعني افكر. مثل ما تقول قام يجيب لها اكل من المطعم ويدز لها يعني بحجة الأولاد. مرة قايل لها مش جايب لها شاي بالقهوة قاعد وياها تاي انه يتحاكمون. المهم كانه حاط لها حق او شيء. خذاها وصلها على البيت قبل ما تنام انه جانا يعني مثل ما تقول خالص تحت يعني قبل ما يجيب على البيت يعني الله العليم انه مغتصبها يعني. هي راحت شكت انه على الشيخ قالت له انه انا هيك يعني نام معي. المهم قنعوها انه لا يعني تيلففون الموضوع ما تفضحوا يتجوزها. انه وقت نومها وهاي جابها كانه مصورها انه الله يا انشرك يا انه تقبلين لي. اول شيء تجوزها برضاعتها يعني تجوزها. قام شو يسوي؟ يجيب مع وقت يكون مو موجود يخلي ربعه بحجة يجون يغسلون ويريحون انه بيت صديقهم وهاي يغتصبونه. اخر شيء زهدت المرأة اشتكت على هيئة شرعية انه جوزي كذا كذا. ما صدقها الشرعي. قالها من شهودك؟ قالت له الله عز وجل انه يشهد انه هذول الخنازير انه يشهد وجوزي يدري. جوزها حكم شنو يرجمونها بالزنا. يرجموها حتى الشرعي صف معهم ورجموها، لأنه ما بين إلا هي وهم، ما حد ينو، وأولادها أطفال يعني. وبعد ما أنه يعني رجموها بالحجر وكذا، يعني حتى ما ماتت، خلوها نهارين معلقة، ما حد كاتبين حطم عليها إنه هاي جرمها كذا، صالبينها صلب. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أوصي أخوتي من جيلي والأصغر مني إنه لا ينقرون بالدولة أو ينضمون لها. الواحد يفضل يأكل تراب وما ينضم للدولة، لأنهم مو على صح وعايشين العالم بضلالة يعني. وأنصحكم مرة ثانية إنه الدولة مي على صح يعني.
So that gives you an example, and I think I'll end there. And I just want to thank the Embassy of Qatar in the US for being our funder, for funding this launch, and also getting behind us so we can really put our project on steroids and grow bigger. And I know Qatar is having some trouble with its neighbors, but this should be a wonderful way to fight terrorism. I hope so. So you're next.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much for organizing this important event. We're so happy to be among you. We're so happy to come all the way from Doha to join you and to contribute to this fruitful sessions. As you rightly said, we are in a crisis, and hopefully this crisis should not impact or put hinders in our collective efforts. But quite frankly, since this crisis erupted, I've been asked to speak quite frequently about our efforts globally, regionally, and domestically. Although we believe this has nothing to do with terrorism, although this crisis and the blockading countries and the crisis and the blockading that imposed upon my country by the blockading countries is a quite unjustified and in a clear violation of international law. The crisis is about our proactive, independent foreign policy, sovereignty and political independence. Terrorism allegations are just a smokescreen. But we regret that the blockading countries, led by the Saudis and the Emiratis, our brothers and cousins, neighbors, continue to target us through an aggressive and orchestrated campaign purely based on misinformation, politically motivated accusations, and even slander. Not only they have failed to convince international communities and major countries like yours, but also incredible and reputable international institutions like the one that we are here today. But that sadly, the reckless policies put our region and the rest of the world in danger, and I'll explain how during my presentations. But I want to make 2 points clear. One, that Qatar is not willing to compromise its sovereignty, nor its right to an independent and proactive foreign policy to satisfy its neighbors. Our economy is strong, our nation is resilient, and we are united more than ever before. The Qatari people have rallied to support their government and His Highness the Emir. We defended our currency and we defended our economy. We have more allies and more friends and more partners than ever before. In fact, the crisis makes us stronger than ever before. As His Highness said, we are 1,000 times better off without them. Yet we are ready to sit and to solve this crisis peacefully and domestic and politically through mediation and negotiations. Second, Qatar has not, does not, and will never support terrorism in any form of manifestations. We stand firm with our partners and the international community in fulfilling our global efforts and commitments to fight terrorism, terror financing, and violent extremism. In fact, we have well-known record and documented record on counterterrorism and preventing violent extremism, which I will speak about today. While the record of the blockading countries today is worse than ever. In contrast, it is the 15 Saudis hijackers, with 2 Emiratis hijackers led by Egyptian hijackers who killed more than 3,000 innocent American people in 9/11. And most of the funds come from United Arab Emirates with the support of the Saudi diplomats and their embassy in Washington, D.C. That's not according to me. That's according to 9/11 Commission. While we all know that the Grand Mufti of Daesh is coming from Bahrain, Turkey al-Bin Ali, self-declared and recognized as a Grand Mufti of Daesh, Bahrain not only failed to stop him from traveling freely, but also granted him immunity. Why? Simply, very simply, he has ties with the Bahraini ruling family. While last year, February 2017, the Egyptian blocked the US proposal from designating Daesh affiliates in Daesh Khorasan, Daesh Hijaz, Daesh of Yemen, and Daesh of Libya to be added to the UN list of sanctions group. We also learned recently from Henry Jackson report last year that published in July 2017 last year that Saudis has a clear link to violent extremism groups in the UK. And the study also urged a public inquiry into the funding of terrorism by the Saudis. We were also shocked 2 weeks ago to learn from Washington Post that the leader of Taliban, Akhtar Mansour, who was sanctioned by the Security Council, were traveling to Dubai quite frequently, not only for shopping, but also for fundraising. That's the reality we have to face with these countries. As I said, we are doing very well in Doha. And as His Highness said, we're 1,000 times better off without them. But the serious problem, as you rightly said, we are facing today is the ramifications of the crisis. The ramifications of the crisis in our collective efforts to fight terrorism, terror financing, and preventing violent extremism, and its impact on international, regional, and sub-regional institutions like the Gulf Cooperation Council, like the Arab League, like the Organization of Islamic States. So the threat is very dangerous and real, and its existence will persist for many times to come. So what should we do? Before we get into the core of our discussions, I have to start with the following premises. Number one, that terrorism is a global phenomenon that should not be associated with any religion or belief, ethnicity, race, region, or culture. Although the majority of these attacks take place in Muslim countries, and thus the significant majority of the victims of these attacks are Muslims. Second, extremist religious doctrines pose an undeniable challenge to all of us. They exist in every culture, and Islam has no monopoly on them. Evil actors continue to twist religious doctrines to poison the minds of desperate people in our region and beyond. It's clear that we are pledged to combat religious extremism. But having said that, attributing violent extremism attributing violence and terrorism to extremist ideology is too simplistic. It does not explain why violent extremism has become a major threat in certain region like ours, while extremist ideologies can be found anywhere, everywhere. Third, unfortunately, as I said, that the majority of the most lethal conflicts are rooted in the Middle East, like the one in Yemen, like the one in Somalia, like the one in Libya, like the one in Syria, like the one in Iraq, and like the one in Afghanistan. There are many factors of such disturbing reality. There is indeed a lack of social and economic progress, unemployment, lack of proper education, critical thinking, social injustice, political exclusions, growing sectarian divisions, regional rivalries, recklessness, unresolved conflicts, and wars such as the one I already mentioned. It is extremely important to address these crises and conflict and put an end to them, and more importantly, to the new policy of adventurism we are witnessing today in our region, as well as political maneuvering by these new adventurists who continue to fuel these crises and conflicts, which their ramifications are putting our region and the world in danger. There are serious challenges also for facing international community as a whole in terms of cooperation. There is legal challenges, there is political challenges, and there is intelligence challenges. If I have time, maybe I just address these challenges briefly. Political challenges, terrorists use violence to achieve political goals, while also some governments, states, politicians use the concept of terrorism to repress, victimize, demonize, and attack their opponents and the positions. It has become easy to label an opposition movement or a group as a terrorist organization. I think the most notable example in recent memory is the Muslim Brotherhood. To some, it's a political party or ruling parties in some countries, while to some other countries like Egypt and United Arab Emirates is terrorist organization. The term of the concept itself has been misused for political purposes. Politically speaking, the term will continue to exist as long as it is self-justified, as well as the pan-political parties that threaten dictators based on this premise as well. Second, legal challenges. We cannot disagree or disregard or violate our human rights obligations while we are combating terrorism. Many justifications, many jurisdictions violate due process while trying to enforce sanctions imposed by the Security Council and its sanction regime itself, which came under scrutiny more than once before the European Court of Justice in the Yassin Qadi case, for instance. Also, there is no internationally agreed legal definition to terrorism. More than 22 years, the United Nations, and since 1996, with the Indian proposal for a comprehensive international convention on terrorism, there is lack of consensus on the definition of terrorism. Negotiations remain deadlocked. So what constitutes terrorism in a given jurisdiction does not mean to the same in other jurisdictions. So this is another challenge in itself. While there is also intelligence challenges, intelligence agencies, their top priority is to steal secrets from each other, even within the same country or jurisdictions. Also, there are confusions among themselves between security and secrecy. They are very obsessed with over-classifying most information. There is a culture of mistrust, speculation, and the desire of independence. Now, let me turn to the root causes, which is, I would say, one of the most important issues that we have to address before we speak about our soft approach to this phenomenon. Well, the United Nations the United Nations Global Counterterrorism Strategy, adopted unanimously by the United Nations 10 years ago, has 4 pillars. And one of the most important pillars is to tackle conditions conducive to terrorism. Unfortunately, in the last 10 years, this pillar has been overlooked. The root causes of violent extremism and terrorism are extremely complex, multifaceted, and often intertwined. They resist simplifications and easy categorizations. Indeed, there is no unique or simple formula to end terrorism and radicalization or radicalism. There is no single pathway to violent extremism. Many years of experience have proven that short-sighted politics, failed leadership, heavily handled approach, a single-minded focus only on security measures, and an ultra disregard for human rights, including the right to human development, have often made things worse. So long-term, holistic, and comprehensive strategy focusing on human development is, in my opinion, the best way forward. Last year, 2016, there was an action plan which is called United Nations UN Secretary General Action Plan for Preventing Violent Extremism. He puts forward more than 670 recommendations for concerted action at the global, regional, and national levels based on 5 interrelated points. First, prevention. Second, leadership and effective institutions. Third, preventing extremism and promoting human rights go hand in hand. And fourth, an all-out approach. I will not discuss all of them, but I will go briefly what we do in Qatar when it comes to BVE-CVE. In Qatar, we take these recommendations into considerations very seriously. We have taken actions in this regard at the global, regional, and national level. Bearing in mind these related points in our action plan, I will focus on our preventive diplomacy, mediation, good offices as a tool for prevention of violence, as well as partnerships, multilateral efforts to prevent violent extremism and terrorism globally, economic empowerment and education regionally, updated laws and legislations, enacted more laws with more robust national mechanism to fight terrorism and terror financing and combating terrorism, as well as through rehabilitation and reintegration domestically. So let me now turn to these efforts in some details. Mediations and good offices. Prolonged and unresolved conflicts tend to provide fertile ground for violent extremism, not only because of the suffering and lack of governance resulting from the conflict itself, but also because such conflicts allow violent extremism groups to exploit deep-rooted grievances in order to garner support and seize territory and resources and control populations. Urgent measures must be taken to resolve protracted conflicts. Resolving these conflicts will undermine the impact of the narratives that Daesh and others is putting. While prevention fails, our best strategy towards securing lasting peace and addressing violent extremism entail inclusive political solutions and accountability. Alternative dispute resolutions, or ADR, is one of our main pillars of our foreign policy. We explore opportunities to introduce ADR mechanisms such as mediation, good offices, arbitration, and resolve conflicts, and achieve sustainable peace. We have managed to succeed in many situations, while some situations are still ongoing. I will give you one example. The situation in Afghanistan, for instance, we have been trying to facilitate talks between Taliban and Afghanistan, or the Kabul government, and the US government. We hope we can bring peace to that country and to put an end to violent extremism and the daily death of innocent people, so we can prevent extremist groups such as ISIL or Daesh from finding a safe haven in that country. The Global Coalition Against Daesh, which is also Qatar is an active member of the Global Coalition Against Daesh, which was formed in September 2014. Qatar, with other 74 members, are committed to tackling Daesh in all forms, to dismantling its network and countering its global ambitions. Qatar is hosting the most active and effective American military base in the region at Al Udeid base, from which airstrikes against terrorist attacks are launched. Beyond the military campaign in Syria and Iraq, the coalition is committed to tackling Daesh financing and economic infrastructures, preventing the flow of foreign terrorist fighters across borders, supporting stabilizations and restoration of essential public services to areas liberated from Daesh, and countering Daesh propaganda and Daesh narratives, at what you are doing. And we are so thankful for the job that you have done. The GSERF, which is a quite fascinating, I would say, fund. Qatar is not only is an active member and only the major donor in that fund, but also is the only Arab and Muslim co-founder of the Global Community and Resilience Fund, GSERF, which is based in Geneva, with Switzerland, United States, UK, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, France, Switzerland, the Netherlands, Japan, and the EU. With this partner, this fund has been able to support community-based projects against violent extremism and radicalizations in countries like Mali, Nigeria, Bangladesh, Kenya, Kosovo, and Myanmar. And in the future, hopefully, we can include Tunisia, Afghanistan, and Somalia as recipient countries. Well, regionally, poverty and ignorance often prove a breeding ground for radicalization and violent extremism that leads to terrorism. So in Qatar, we focus on economic empowerment of our young men and women, as well as on education. And let me just elaborate on in these two things. I will not speak about the figures, the number of the youth around the world, which is 1.8 billion, which is quite important assets. But I will tackle briefly what one of our non-governmental organizations, such as Solitic, which work in a close cooperation and coordination with the government of Qatar in the fields of job creation and supporting global efforts to combat terrorism through economic empowerment. Solitic expanded its operation and created the local, regional, and international partners in 16 countries, because we believe that most of the foreign terrorist fighters are coming from Arab countries, from Tunisia, from Morocco, from Jordan, from Saudi Arabia, from these countries. So we felt having these kind of projects in Arab countries is quite important. We managed by 2017 created job opportunities for more than 650,000 youth into employment opportunities. Moreover, we have provided youth with access to resources such as training, career guidance, e-learning opportunities, and innovative technological solutions, which helped connect youth to job opportunities and contributed to the overall sustainable economic and social growth of their societies, thus turning youth away from extremism. With the support of the government of Qatar, we are aiming to achieve or to create 2 million jobs by 2020, half of which will be achieved within this current year, 2018. I have a lot of figures and initiatives and programs, including in Saudi Arabia as well, because we believe in the role of women and the equality and gender equality. So we work with the Saudis, of course, that before the crisis, there was around 30% of the Saudi women are not working. The employment among women is 30%. So Solitic has been working
with the Saudi for several years to provide jobs for the Saudi women. Last year, before the crisis, we managed to enroll 4,650 Saudi women. And we have more programs on the line, but because of the crisis, all these initiatives suspended. Not all the initiatives, but the initiatives in Saudi Arabia. Education is also one of our soft power to tackle the root causes and violent extremism. As part of the struggle against poverty and social marginalizations, we need to ensure that every child receives a quality education. There is around 61 million children who have no access to quality primary education because of constraints such as extreme poverty, conflicts, affected environments. We have an initiative that's called Education Above All, Educate a Child, and we managed to enroll around 5.8 million child in more than 50 countries, mostly in Asia and Africa. We are about also to reach 8.8 million in the coming years. Our target is to provide basic education or primary education for 10 million child out of school. I apologize for taking so long, but briefly, domestically, we maintain a solid and legal legislative framework to counterterrorism and its financing. Legislation has been put into place in 2005, 2004, 2010, and 2012, and most recently, last year, 2017, by which we established and finalized our designations regime. We have also worked with the international partners, such as the IMF and regional governments, to address any legal issues or gap that might be found in our legislations. We have prosecuted some individuals. We maintain a program on education, on rehabilitation, reintegration on case-by-case basis. Since we don't have foreign terrorist fighters, the number we have is less than 10. So it's very easy to tackle this. We impose sanctions on others, those who are designated by the Security Council or by our regime. We impose travel ban on them. We frozen their assets. And this is, as I said, it's ongoing process. Once again, I apologize for taking so long. And I thank you for your attention. Look forward for your questions. Sorry.
So great. Thank you both for your comments. Now we enter into the always delightful Q&A portion of the event where you can ask your questions. Feel free to be as aggressive and as blunt or as left field, right field as you want to be. Thank you very much. Well, please go ahead. Yes, and you can address a question to the three of us or specifically to one person.
Mr. Ambassador, if you look at the economic reality of the Gang of Four blockade after 10 months, it's failed economically. There's no question about it. You look at all of the statistics, your trade is up, GDP is up, employment is up. It's completely backfired on basically the Gang of Four. So where's the end here? I mean, they have not been able to reach any of their objectives. It goes on. Do you see a mediation with Kuwait, with the United States? How does this end?
Is this working? Well, thank you very much. As I said, our economy is strong. Our nation is resilient. We are so united. We defended our currency. We defended our economy. And believe it or not, we are doing very well. That's what I can tell you. The problem is the ramifications of the crisis in your national interest, the ramification of the crisis on third countries, the ramifications of the crisis on international, regional, sub-regional institutions. These institutions is not active anymore.
the collaboration between the intelligence communities in these countries is shut down. That's the problem we are facing. So I think all of us have collective interest. And when I say third countries, I will give you an example. Today, in the past, we are mediating between Eritrea and Djibouti. They have a border dispute. They asked us, based on their consent. We went to the region. We put our people, we sent our troop. The United Nations paid nothing for us, but we believe in this. We believe in peace. We believe in mediation. We believe in good officers, and we want to solve this. So we sent our troops for 5 years. We are monitoring the situation between the two countries, an island. We're trying to save lives, trying to work on the exchange of prisoners of war. And with the Saudis, political, financial blackmailing, or whatever you want to call it, they asked the president of Djibouti to cut the relationship with Qatar. Although we were mediating between his country and his neighbor. So what we did, basically, we informed the Security Council, we informed the Arab League, we informed the African Union. We told them we are leaving from that area. So we took our troops back home. Within hours, his country got invaded by Eritrea. Why? Because of the Saudis and Emiratis blackmailing and policy. Of course, this is a sovereign decision for him, but this is the situation that put the region and the Horn of Africa and these countries in danger. So that's what we have been trying to say and to tell, that yes, we are doing very well, but the problem is not about Qatar. The problem is about the region and the rest of the world. I think this is if it continues to be like this without any hope, I think they are serving Daesh and terrorism agenda.
Yeah, before I take another question, since I am the moderator, one thing I would ask is, this is about, of course, about soft power approaches to counterterrorism, not about the fight between the gang of 1 or the gang of 4 or the gang of 20. Personally, I will tell you, if this panel was about this, I would have boycotted it. I would not have come, because that's not something that I am interested in talking about. I'm interested in talking about soft power approaches to counterterrorism. And I'll make one brief point before I take a question. One of the things I study, of course, is how the soft power of terrorist propaganda is used in social media. And we all know ISIS and Al-Qaeda, et cetera. I'm going to mention 2 websites, just because I think it's important. There's a website called islamweb.net that was connected at some point to the Qatari government, which has pro-jihadist propaganda, has had pro-jihadist propaganda in the past. I think the man behind it, Al-Qahtani, is now, I think, sanctioned by the Qatari government, I believe. There's another website, which is the most popular, at one point was the most popular Islam website in the world, called Islam QA, connected to the Saudis. And it also has very similar type of poisonous, pro-terrorist, Salafi jihadist, pro-Salafi propaganda, which kind of amplifies, and if not pro-ISIS, it actually helps make the case for the ISIS argument. So I would just, I want to be fair, I want to be balanced here, and so it's easy to point fingers here and there. So let's talk about soft power approaches to terrorism. Who has a soft power approach to terrorism question? Yes, let's have a lady.
Thank you to all for the representation. Hello, thank you to all for the great presentation, and congratulations. And I just want to thank again all of you for the great presentation. And my question is related to soft power, approaches. And you know the soft power approaches are fundamentally based in sort of the legitimacy also of the systems and the underlying. And you rightfully mentioned the fact that education in humanities education in humanities is important to create social basis for a more Pacific community and region and world. But the thing is, that won't be enough, isn't it? We have two great examples. If my recollection is correct, Hitler was a failed painter, artist, and wasn't Stalin also a failed poet or something like that? So, I mean, not to take the importance of the humanity education, but we need a lot more stronger policies in terms of probably a culture of human rights that is not just preached but also exercised. So I would like the opinion of you, I mean, the whole panel regarding this.
Please. Go ahead. Oh, you want me? Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I mean, when I referred to Dr. Abdul Hamid Al-Ansari's ideas about kind of a humanistic education, which includes music and art, I agree with you. You can do that in a very simplistic way, which has absolutely no effect. I think what he was talking about is so much of the appeal of jihadist ideology, Islamist ideology, is about the other, the demonization of the other, right? Those people. We see this in racist and xenophobic discourse worldwide. It has nothing to do with just jihadism. And so what he was, I think what he was saying is that a humanistic education which is about the other, which, so if you're in the Middle East and you're learning about Islam and you're also learning about, I don't know, the glories of Michelangelo or Mozart as well, and Ibn Arabi and Fairuz and Kulthum and it makes you a richer, more rounded person intellectually and ideologically. Why? The extremist discourse, and I think this is true of extremist discourse everywhere, depends on a very binary black and white proposal, right? Us and them. The other, which is the infidel other, al-mushrik, al-murtad, al-kafir, whatever, etc. That language, right? You want to break down those kind of binary, kind of us versus them things. And so kind of incorporating a more kind of humanistic, global approach is one way of doing it. But you're right, it can be done like any of this, like an approach that involves media, like a political approach. It can be done poorly or well, and it can be done superficially or in a way which is rich and powerful.
I don't know if it's working. It's working. As I said, we always have to think about the root causes. The root cause is the key. If you want to tackle this, always work on the root cause. The problem is that most of the law enforcement, politicians, we are neglecting talking about the root causes because the root causes are the most important. But what we do, there are a lot of root causes for this, but we cannot do everything. Qatar cannot do anything. We cannot do everything. So what we focus on three things. We focus on mediation. So we want to stop this conflict. Yes, this is not about the crisis, but we want to stop this crisis. We want to stop these conflicts. We want to stop the conflict in Yemen. We want to stop the conflict in Somalia, in Libya, in Syria, in Iraq, in Afghanistan. Otherwise, we will have more terrorists that are coming and going around all these safe havens. And also, we are tackling also the unemployment because it's absolutely important issues. And also the lack of education. Of course, not all, because we know there are a lot of well-sophisticated terrorists who are very well in studies even in this country. But we're talking about the majority. Is it one of the root causes? Yes. Do we have to tackle it? Yes. Can we do it? Yes. And also the unemployment. You see, there are a lot of rich people fighting with Daesh. Yes, that's reality. But the majority are not rich. They have no jobs. So that's why we focus. We cannot focus in all countries. We focus in where the most foreign terrorist fighters are coming from, in this case, in our region, unfortunately. So that's what we do, and we wish other countries can do. I'm really surprised. I'm really surprised as an individual. If you have the global fund, it is the global fund, the only global fund on earth
which is the Global Community Engagement Resilience Fund, which is based in Geneva, which I mentioned. Why Qatar is the only Arab country in that fund with Western countries and the EU and Japan? Why? Why these rich countries are not coming and joining and paying some money so we address the local drivers of violent extremism in countries like the one I mentioned?
Okay, let's get a question in the back. How about way in the back, you, sir? Yes.
Hi, I'm John Russellman with the Investigative Project on Terrorism. Thank you for being with us today, Ambassador. I have sort of a three-part question. A lot of consternation has been about Sheikh Qaradawi and the International Union of Muslim Scholars being based out of Doha. I mean, Sheikh Qaradawi, according to bin Laden's diaries, was somebody who Al-Qaeda reached out to, and according to various sources, Sheikh Qaradawi's ally, Sheikh al-Salabi, went to Libya from Qatar and worked to support the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, which is connected to Al-Qaeda, according to various groups. How do you reconcile hosting the International Union of Muslim Scholars in Qatar with your soft power things, concerning their support for Salafi jihadism? And also, my last part of my question is, do you consider Hamas just does it fit the definition of terrorism?
Is it about soft power, this one, or do you want me to tackle this as well?
It's up to you. People can, like anything, people can answer whatever they want.
You are the moderator.
People can ask whatever they want. People can answer whatever they want.
Okay, you are the moderator. I have no problem in answering this. Yusuf al-Qaradawi is a Qatari. He's about 90 years old now. He has not been in Al Jazeera or any local national radio, any outlets in Doha or outside. He's quite old. His health is not that good, but he was awarded certain awards by Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum of Dubai. He also got a very prestigious award from the King of Saudi Arabia, King Abdullah, before he passed away. And this is what I know about him. But that's what I can tell you. Hamas, yes, in some other countries they consider it as a terrorist organizations, while others cannot consider it as a terrorist organizations. I think the most important for anybody, if you want to make a good argument against any country to classify this entity or that individual as a terrorist, is try to make sure that the Security Council of the United Nations to sanction that individual or that entity. In that case, all member states of the United Nations are bound to follow through. So Hamas is not a terrorist organization. Qatar, so in this case, we do not consider Hamas as a terrorist organization. So I don't want to go into this and more details because it's not in the interest, ultimately, if you want to have peace in the Middle East, it's in your interest to consolidate and just to have a kind of reconciliations, national reconciliations between all key players in Palestine, because ultimately it is in the interest of peace, and ultimately it's in the interest of Israel.
Thank you. Let's see. I'm trying to find a lady. That's why you. Yes, you right there. This young lady, and then you, sir. So.
Hi, my question's for Dr. Speckhard about your program in particular. Can you describe for us the data you plan to collect to show the impact that your program will have, and to what extent do you plan to include the case studies, such as the ones that you described with the young teenage thug, just to illustrate for other counselors moving forward how they can use your products?
Thank you, Elizabeth, for the question. It's a soft power question. We've only been at this for 2 years, making the videos, and we really struggled. We had small money to start, and so we were quite amazed that we could get ISIS on video, then that we could get some video editors, and our first couple of videos were very good. They were made by a woman that made Hollywood films, but she worked for free, so we weren't paying people. So we were really amazed that we could make some films and that they were good. Then we took them out and focus tested them. So we went to Zarqa, Jordan. That's where Zarqawi was from, the leader of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. We went to Erbil, Jordan. We went to Kosovo. We went to Kyrgyzstan to madrasas. We went around the world and showed these to vulnerable audiences. And thanks partly to State Department that sent me out as a speaker to speak on CVE. I always take advantage of anywhere I travel to do as much as I can, as well as have fun. And anyway, we took them out into these places, and we showed the films, and we asked questions. And some people asked us, did you ask a before and after? You know, before, do you love ISIS? And after the film, do you hate ISIS? And I said, no. And now we do ask that question because people wanted it so badly. But to me, it's completely stupid. You know, really, do you think a video completely changes your mind? Maybe, but I doubt it. It's much more interesting. Do you believe the speaker? Do you believe he's even from ISIS? Do you think that we're CIA? We're not. And how does the speaker's speech affect you? What do you think of the message? So in Zarqa, on one of the videos, they're showing that chopping of a hand. And they said, you know, we don't disagree with that. And we all want a caliphate. That's something we really want. But we don't know if the ISIS caliphate is the right one, which is interesting, right? And if you were a programmer and Search for Common Ground asked, do you do programs? And no, we don't. We make the tools for other people to do programs. And we'd love to do some programs, but we don't have those kind of resources. But so imagine you're a programmer and you're thinking, what do these kids need? The kids start talking about, you know, if I post on Facebook that I'm bored, they contact me. And then they start talking to me. And they know Islam better than I know Islam. And so we asked, well, what do you do? And they said, well, nobody here will talk because the GID, that's the Jordanian Security Services, you get investigated if you start talking about ISIS. So we can't talk to our parents, we can't talk to our mom, we can't talk to our teachers, nobody wants to talk to us. So how do you get your answers? We go back to the internet. Well, that's really scary, right? So you know right away what these kids need. And same thing in Erbil, we found it a little bit different. So in the beginning, we just focus tested. And we also focus tested with experts. How could you use this tool? Would you be able to bring it into school? So when teachers in Belgium and Netherlands were telling us, we always have one real Facebook scholar, you know, Islamic scholar, that will take over the class. And I would love to show these videos, and I'd love to have a discussion in my class, but I'm too scared. I'm scared of my students. I mean, that's information too, right? That we need to equip these teachers. I mean, teachers are so fundamental to people's lives. And if the kids are dangerous, somebody's got to be talking to them, right? So why aren't those teachers better equipped? It tells you, you know, already an answer. Not that we're providing that answer yet, but at least we're learning it. And then when we started dropping them into Telegram, doing our fake Facebook profiles, and then using Facebook ads, we collect all the data. And as you said, the papers are out there. And one of them we had trouble putting in a scientific journal because, Mike, you'll love this. They were all over us about law enforcement will be confused and think you're ISIS with your videos. And I said, no, no, law enforcement knows about us and has been asking for NGOs to work with them to fight ISIS. But anyway, so we're going step by step, and we hope to get more strategic and more scientific as we go. But you know, with limited resources, that's what we do. And we keep testing them in the various ways that we're able to. And we also give them to partners and say, go for it, use them.
Thank you. Please.
Well, thank you all for the work that you're doing and for being here today and discussing this topic. As a preface to my question, this is some great work that we saw demonstrated here today. And it's kind of reactive work, though. As we're putting out the fire that has already started. My last job in government was as the Director of Future Operations for the Army's Human Terrain System. And this is exactly where I was hoping we would be going more and more in terms of preparation of the potential operating environments, messaging early with the to possible receptive populations to counter the message that they're getting from potential existential or future foes. So, and you just alluded to it, so I'd like to ask you to expand upon it. How do you see the strategic view of leading this community of people who are involved in this type of work so that there is a coordinated effort and yet not becoming perceived to be an arm of government, and how do we deconflict the covert action type things that government does that aren't totally alien to some of the things that you do? So I'd like you to, if you could spend a moment, just tell us what you think the strategic vision is and how you see this as helping to prevent a problem rather than having to respond to the problem or respond to it with fewer forces and resources. Thank you.
Well, we've been telling the military and asking our military to be a sponsor to our work for a long time. And I keep asking them, just give me one Tomahawk missile. And I can do more with soft power than hard power. And I'm not saying we don't need Tomahawk missiles. And, you know, thankfully our military did really help to take the territory back from ISIS. And a third of Iraq was held under ISIS. How horrible. But it's a complicated question you ask. We like to have lots of funders, you know, ideally, right, who doesn't? But, you know, so that we never look like we're doing the bidding of anyone. And with every funder, we always say we need to stay independent. You understand, this is what we do. And we decided to brand our videos. You saw a brand on it right early on. That was a hard decision because we put ourselves at risk. But since I've been doing this for 20 years, and I think, you know, a little bit known in the field, we decided it was important to say this is being done by academics and people that have been studying terrorism forever. And we don't brand it right in the beginning. We make it look like an ISIS film, so we catch somebody that might watch an ISIS film to watch ours. But as he starts to understand this is a defector or a prisoner that doesn't particularly care for ISIS anymore, then you can show the brand, because I want people to be able to go and look, who made this? Because, you know, isn't that always our question? Nowadays, you know, we're reading fake news, real news, you know, is it Russian news? Is it American news? Is it Fox? Is it CNN? You know, who's behind this? What's the agenda? And we wanted ours to be clearly known. You know, we're a bunch of academics, and we're interested in telling the truth about what goes on in ISIS and other terrorist groups from their own words. But as far as a coordinated strategy, I tend to favor organic things. And I think the more and more that little NGOs and little groups, you know, start to make things, although, you know, we know as a small NGO, you sure do need a backer behind you to be able to do things. Because we've worked without salaries and, you know, done things with shoestrings and managed to make it happen, but it's hard. So, you know, there is a role for governments to be involved and be behind things, but maybe to step back and let them be a little bit more independent. I hope that answers your questions.
Good. Yes, sir.
Well, thank you, Ambassador, Dr. Speckhard, Ambassador Qahtani. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I'll play a little bit off what Jeff had to say. History just seems to be repeating itself over and over again, and very seldom do we learn the lessons of the past. So we go back to 9/11 with all of this because, Ambassador, you were talking about things being binary. If we're going to talk about soft power, the alternative is hard power, so you have to consider that. When 9/11 happened, our immediate instinctive response was we're going to apply hard power. Yeah. There were some, it was a small minority of us, who suggested we not go into Iraq and stick our fist into that hornet's nest without a plan for what we were going to do if those hornets got out and started biting us, notwithstanding the fact that Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11, as we now know. But there was an even smaller minority who wanted to take a different approach to Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. Rather than raising the stature of Al-Qaeda with bin Laden as its general, suggesting that Al-Qaeda can only be dealt with the full military force of the United States and our Western allies. An alternative approach was to consider Al-Qaeda as a criminal organization, that this was a criminal act, that bin Laden should have been arrested, tried, humiliated. Don't allow him to be a martyr. Don't allow his ideas to spread. Make it clear this was a criminal act. It was not an act of war. And we continue to define the enemy as worthy of our military instead of as a criminal element. ISIS is in large part a criminal element. And I do think that it matters how you define what you're dealing with. The appropriate response, I think some people would feel to that, and I know the ambassador doesn't want us to deal with the blockade, but a certain resilience, strength, patient wisdom, adherence to core values is what our State Department wanted to do. Colin Powell was drowned out. But I wonder if you might address the way in which we are defining violent extremism. And perhaps that might serve as some lessons so that we don't continue to repeat the mistakes of the past.
Thank you. Did either of you want to take that?
Well, when I said one of the premises I put forward is the challenges that's facing international community as a whole. There is legal challenges, political challenges, and intelligence challenges. And these challenges are really serious, and we have to look at them. And that has to do with the concept itself. Are we talking about violent extremism, or violent extremism that leads to terrorism? So there are three types of violence we're talking about. We don't want to say, yes, it's enough to feel the violent extremism. It's not enough to feel terrorism in order to deal with it. But you absolutely agree with you. I think the approach that we had in 9/11 and after that, in 2014 also with Daesh, was, of course, we need to use military forces. There's no doubt about this. But we did not treat Daesh and Al-Qaeda and their operatives as criminals, period. We started using them as terrorists, and that's quite, it's not defined enough. And that makes like our disagreement, the challenges, the legal challenges, the political challenges, the intelligent challenges is there. Because we don't know what we are fighting. We have no idea what we are talking about. But maybe we have a feeling that it is about this and that. But I think had we had a clear definition of violent extremism, which the UNSG in his report, which is the most comprehensive report as we speak today, said unequivocally there is no definition of violent extremism. So quite frankly, we don't know what are we combating or preventing. Because there is no definition, as I said. But that was quite extremely important to look at it from legal perspective, from criminal justice perspective. It's not from political military perspective. And that was the problem, I guess. I think your point is absolutely valid. Had we considered it as an organized crime and we go after them legally and judicially, I think we would have had a better result. Today, as we speak, now we have, there is a large number of returnees after liberating Daesh, after liberating Iraq from Daesh. Now, always the military approach is not necessarily the right approach. The soft power, preventive diplomacy
and preventive action is the best way forward. If you take like those detainees and their families and their kids, which are the kids are victims, as the way we see it. If you have a 3-year-old child coming from, was born in Daesh, he is not a terrorist, he's a victim, even their kids as well. So there are countries who tend to say, no, we have two options with them, either to kill them or to put them in jail. That's the approach that some countries are having. Even they don't want them to return. Well, if they don't return, they will have two options, either to stay and fight or go to somewhere else and fight. So why didn't you just allow them to come back? And when they come back, don't just throw them in jails, because you cannot prove it beyond reasonable doubt that these kids committed a crime, because you cannot do a cross-examination. There's a lot of due process involved. So always preventive measures is the best way forward. Go and bring them. And some of the cases, 95 of the cases, went off, just get acquitted. And some of them spent a short period of time in jail and they got away with it. Why? Because you cannot prove it beyond reasonable doubt. There is a violation of human rights. There will be a due process. So what to do? What do you focus on? Rehabilitation and reintegration, even within the framework of criminal justice, is the best option. So always we think just militarily, which is not the best options. Yes, we need to do military, of course. Yes, we need to prosecute them, those who committed heinous crimes, but this is not the only approach. If before we don't want to make the same mistakes, and I think the history repeats itself, we are wary. Maybe there will be a third phase of violence and terrorists, even worse than Daesh. So what's needed? We need to tackle the root causes of this. As simple as this. We need to stop conflicts and war in the region. That's what we need. But I don't know why countries are not focusing on military, not focusing on the soft approach. Why many countries are saying, no, it's very difficult to work on rehabilitation and reintegration because it's too expensive. Just to prosecute him, throw him to jail, and that's it. So I think you're right. You're right. If we look at this from legally perspective, from criminal justice perspective, I think that would help.
Did you want to add anything?
It's probably enough. It was great.
I would just, before I go into that question, I would just add one thing. ISIS absolutely had to be crushed militarily. If for no other reason, an organization that is premeditated on the idea that victory is divinely ordained. We will conquer Rome, bi-idhnillah. We will paint the White House black by permission of God. It absolutely had to be crushed to completely disintegrate the kind of the ideological religious premise of what they were doing. So if maybe you can debate whether we had to do it or somebody else had to do it, but they had to be destroyed militarily and to be seen to be destroyed militarily. Your point about the building blocks of extremism and all of that are very well taken, but there had to be some kind of defeat because so much of their success was this image of unstoppable power that was going to sweep over. Baqiya wa tatamaddad, here to stay and growing. So you had to show that they were not here to stay and that they were not growing.
Would we have had an ISIS if we had gone into Iraq?
Well, I mean, certainly Al-Qaeda precedes us going into Iraq. And, of course, Zarqawi began his organization in the 1990s in Jordan. So certainly Al-Qaeda, which declared war on the United States, in 1998 in the Clinton administration. So would it have been, I think the right question that I would ask is, would it have been as bad if we had got in or not? I think that it wouldn't have been as bad. But the roots of Salafi jihadism predate 9/11, predate us going into Iraq, predate a lot of things. I mean, remember, a lot of the things that you see ISIS and Al-Qaeda did, we began to see in Egypt in the 1970s. This is Takfir wa Hijra and these other groups, splinter groups of either Salafi organizations or the Muslim Brotherhood organization. in the 1970s in Egypt, basically robbing people, religious minorities, killing policemen, and the ideology and the justification for all of it is exactly what 30 years later, 40 years later, Al-Qaeda and ISIS would use. Ambassador, go ahead. I'm looking for a lady that wanted to ask a question as well, but I like to be fair.
Hi, I'm Patrick Theros. About 25 years ago, I used to run the counterterrorism shop in the Department of State. And it's a little bit of deja vu in all of this, except the difference back then was that we were concentrating primarily on terrorism sponsored by nationalist and leftist organizations. And someplace along the line, we have managed to make terrorism now almost the exclusive province of Islam. Certainly in the late 80s, early 90s, I think there's a fair argument that Hamas was partly created by the State of Israel in order to counteract Fatah and the nationalist and leftist terrorism. All this by way of saying we need, I believe, to look at the root causes, as the ambassador said, and the root causes being that the communist who organized terrorism in the 1970s is no different than the Islamist who organized terrorism in the early part of the 21st century. These are people with a will to power who take an existing cause. So I think it is, yes, the current short-term problem is Islamic terrorism. The problem are the root causes that are not addressed that allow people with the will to power to exploit that billion or so very unhappy young people, whether they're rich or poor or anything like that.
Thank you. Did either of you want to comment on that?
I think I agree with him.
Yeah, I would just agree. I would say whenever a group uses your religion, and it's not just ISIS and Al-Qaeda using Islam, abortion clinic terrorists have used Christianity. There's a book called Army of God that calls people to come out and stand outside of abortion clinics with arms and fire at abortion doctors to save the lives of unborn children. But whenever a group with a will to power and willing to exploit the disadvantaged or the unhappy also takes advantage of your religion and uses something that you were brought up to really value and to believe, then they become even more powerful. And I think that may be the difference from what you were seeing 25 years ago and what we're seeing today, although there are so many similarities, as you pointed out. Thank you.
Yeah, I think there's a problem with twisting religious doctrines, which the West and others will take this for granted. This is what Islam about. This is, I think, I don't want you to X person to convert to Islam in order to understand what the right Islam. But I think there are sometimes using certain religious terminologies in the framework of our fight against terrorism, I think is counterproductive. For instance, if you say like jihad and jihadism and all of that, this is maybe has a special connotation or meaning within the religion of Islam. And when you say this is Khilafah or Khalifa, this is kind of a propaganda campaign, propaganda gift that you are giving it to Daesh and its operatives. This is not Khilafah, this is not jihad, this is just organized crime, and these are criminals, and they are just hijacking my religion, which asks for peace and tolerance and mutual understanding. That's the problem we are having today. People are not explaining that, not asking others to avoid using these kind of terminologies within our discussions, because I think it's a counterproductive. Yes, there are some, we can read it. Yes, the jihad is said in the Quran and Islam, but in extremely very, very narrow context. But this is not jihad. What they are doing is basically they're committing heinous, serious, unspeakable crimes. Islam has no monopoly on them. So that's basically you want to understand. And one of my experiences I was taking, we had like a kind of conference about recruitments to radical groups, and there are two phases of radicalizations. One, recruitment, you go to the battlefield and then you come back. And when some countries, I'm not going to name them, but they are the elite in their countries, and they're trying to give presentations. And from their experiences, they found that the recruiters, they said that most of the recruiters have deep knowledge of religion. And when we asked them which religion you were talking about, no answer. I said, you're talking about Christianity, Judaism? No answer. Then so I think you are talking about Islam. Do they have deep knowledge in religion? I said, yes, this is what they told us. The recruiters, they have deep knowledge of religion. And when we asked them, do they have a criminal record? Surprisingly, all the recruiters have criminal record in Belgium, Netherlands, UK, Spain, and so forth. So that's basically certain individuals who have no knowledge of religion, just hijack my religion and just say this is the best way to do it.
That's an interesting point. I'm going to ask a question. That's a very interesting point. I think I would phrase it slightly differently, in that one of the problems is that when self-named jihadist organizations like ISIS or Al-Qaeda quote religion and quote religious texts and misquote religious texts, people believe them. So it's not Westerners saying that these phrases are used this way. فَأُقْتُلُوا الْمُشْرِكِينُ حَيْثَ وَجَدْتُهُمْ. Kill the polytheists wherever you find them. This is a phrase in the Quran, which is part of a larger paragraph that is talking about, I'm not a Muslim, but I think I'm on safe ground saying this, which is talking about a specific event in specific time in 7th century Arabia. It's not a universal call to slaughter the infidel wherever you want, right? It's very specific to a specific thing. However, ISIS and many other similar groups quote it specifically as if it applies for all time. Yeah. So they're misquoting the Quran. There's no doubt about that. However, it's not like you're misquoting something and everyone goes, that's so silly, you're misquoting, I don't believe you. Enough people believe that misquoting. Maybe this goes to the lack of religious education, that there's enough people in the Muslim world in that specific case that respond to an obvious quoting out of context of a verse from the Quran. So there's a problem of kind of the masses understanding. Whereas a person can stand up and pose as a scholar and pose that they know and quote verses, and enough people will believe them. Enough will believe them that 40,000 of them will, leave Western Europe and go to the Middle East and follow up with that. So it's not just a part of the quoting of religious verses. It's that it's believed by people to be somehow valid. So they get away with the misquoting. Yes, please.
Thank you. My question is for Dr. Speckhard. I keep thinking about the teacher in Belgium. Thank you. My question is for Dr. Speckhard. I keep thinking about the story of the teacher in Belgium who is afraid to show your videos to her students. What do you think is part of the cause of that? Is it something that's specific to Belgium or to Europe in general? And then how do you think soft power initiatives can help to combat that particular problem? Because it was just very frightening for me to hear that. It really struck me. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Pauline. Where's your husband from? Ghent?
He's from Belgium. So
yeah, but where?
On my ear.
Okay, yeah.
And he's actually listening on the live feed.
Hi. And it's not just Belgium. It's all over Europe. There's enclaves of Muslim communities that haven't found their way into society. There's blame on both sides of why they haven't. And in Belgium, it's North Africans, for the most part, that haven't managed to integrate. Not all of them, some of them. And I did hundreds of interviews with these communities. And what they would tell me is, I can get an education here quite cheaply because it's provided by the state. But when I go for a job interview, I'm told, Mohammed, I couldn't put you in the front office. Or Jamila, I'm sorry, you'd have to take off that headscarf. And so they have frustrated aspirations. They're angry. They're not fitting in. The boys more often date across cultures, and the girls less so. There's a lot of structural reasons, and there's a lot of inside their own community reasons, but there's anger. And so if there was no ISIS, no Al-Qaeda, probably that anger would be worked out. But when a group comes in and says, I've got an answer for this social problem, and then they get on Facebook, they get on Twitter, and now it's more Telegram, and drink this poisonous drink. And the recruiters that were active in this particular school, Sharia for Belgium had formed around this school. And some of the kids had been recruited and gone to Syria. And the teachers were telling us, we'll get a kid in that's like a scholar, that's, listened to all these videos, and these are the scholars that the Europeans are talking about. So from their point of view, this is a person knowledgeable about Islam, but much more knowledgeable than the teacher. So she says, if I showed this video in my class, and I would be afraid because they get really aggressive, they're angry, and they're angry sometimes with good cause, but they're really educated, and the recruiters that were working in Antwerp, for instance, they would come and tell the kids, come and work on a charity for Syria with us. And by the way, did you know your father really did something terrible bringing you to a kafir country, an unbelieving country? He's not a real Muslim. If he was, he would move you to a Muslim country. So the kid starts to get confused, he gets separated from his own father, has angry arguments at home, and is becoming more Muslim with this group, and eventually they ship him off to Syria, to ISIS. And the teacher said, these kids are just too well educated on these topics that we have no idea how to deal with it. And if we showed this video, it would open up a discussion for sure. But it's a discussion that I don't think that I could handle. And for me, it told me a couple things. What's wrong with, if you have a couple of out-of-control students, why don't they get removed from your classroom for that discussion? Why isn't the teacher trained better to control her classroom or his classroom? And how can we equip students, and some of these are science teachers or, it wasn't their topic, but how could we equip all teachers, and this is a soft power approach, to be equipped to speak against these things because their kids right outside the school are running into these recruiters. And now they've cleaned that up in Belgium, thank God. That those guys got arrested, the Sharia for Belgium guys. So you can be more relaxed in Belgium. It's a wonderful country, good beer, good chocolate. And thanks for the question.
Thank you, that's a great answer. Yes, it's time, and so thank you all very much. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you for coming.